This right here is my 2002 Jeep Wrangler, and we have slowly been building it from basically the ground up. When I bought this thing, I bought it for $1,800. It did not run, did not start. We got all that fixed first, and then it was time to start working on the rust. Now this thing has a lot of rust, hence why I only paid $1,800 for it. The frame on this thing was starting to rust out pretty badly. There was a couple spots that had some holes in it. We ended up fixing that with Rustbusters frame sections. Got all that fixed. Next up was the floor pans and the torque boxes. Torque boxes are a common issue on these TJs also. They tend to rust out pretty quickly. So we got all that fixed and replaced with thicker metal. It looks really good. And then in our most recent episode, we tackled this back section right here and pretty much got it all cut out and replaced. This section right here is where the body mounts to the frame, and that was all rusted out. So what we had to do is we had to basically cut off this whole back section to replace that piece, get all that fixed, and then replace it all with brand new panels. And that pretty much concludes all the rust on this thing. There might be a little bit more up in the front section. We haven't dug into any of that yet. We'll take all that apart before we start painting and fix any little details up there, but I don't think there's really anything up there that we have to be concerned about. Also, last episode, we got the bodywork all handled. Since we replaced a lot of these body panels, we had a little bit of body work to do to fix the welds and little dents and dings. Back here in the corners, we got all that fixed. And then on the sides right here, there used to be rock sliders that had holes drilled in, and that caused the whole side panel to get a little wavy. So we had to do a good bit of body work right there to get it all smooth and looking good. But pretty much all the body work is taken care of right now. I noticed there's a little dent on the hood that we need to fix, and the same thing on the cowl up here. A little tiny dent we need to fix, but we will handle that before we actually get to painting this thing, because we'll have to do a lot of priming work and prepping work and sand this whole thing down. So we can focus on that later date. We also ended up bedlining the whole inside of this Jeep along with underside of it to protect it from any future rust getting in there. That's going to be a lot harder to penetrate. And it looks really good. I love how this looks, and we are getting really close to getting this thing painted. But before we can paint it, there is still a little bit more work we have to do. We basically have to put this thing back together and be able to drive it out of here. That way we can clean up this garage and get it all prepped and ready for paint. We need to make sure all the dust and rust and everything is out of here before we get to painting. We don't want dust bits or anything like that in our paint job, so we do have to put this thing back together to be able to do that. But it ain't that simple, because we are going to be doing something else. This thing, since I've owned it, has had a 2.5-inch lift kit on it from Rough Country. I love how it drives. It drives very smooth for a Jeep. Comparing it to my parents' Jeep, this thing drives in better condition. I don't know what kind of lift kit they have on theirs. It's not Rough Country, but I don't know what brand it is. I love the way this thing drives, but I do want a little bit bigger of a lift kit. So Rough Country actually sent me out their 4-inch long arm lift kit, along with some other bits and pieces that we need to complete this whole lift kit swap out. This lift kit is in okay condition. It's getting a lot of surface rust and definitely some road use. I think it's a good time to switch it out, and what better time than when it's already all taken apart. A little bit easier, don't have to put it all back together and then take it apart after we paint it all. Might as well get to it right now and get all that swapped out. But there's a couple things I need to do before we start working on that. I need to put the exhaust back in and the fuel tank and everything all back in. The fuel tank holder is looking pretty rough, so I want to clean all that up, paint it, and also add new straps on it because the old straps are all rusted out and starting to break apart. And then the exhaust system, let me show you that thing. This right here is my old exhaust. I had to cut it out to be able to fix the frame because there's a lot of sections I had to weld up in there, and the frame would be in the way. And while it's out, I'm going to go ahead and replace a lot of it and make it look a little bit better. I'm going to replace the muffler along with this tubing. I ordered a better setup for that, along with a new muffler. And then this section right here, I'm going to end up keeping, but I am going to clean it up a bit and also replace this section because all that is rusted out. I've never done any kind of exhaust work, so this will be a first for me. I think it'll be pretty easy, but I'll tell you afterwards if it was. Along with fixing that exhaust, we also need to clean up this. This is the transmission holder / exhaust plate thing. We need to get this thing cleaned up and installed back underneath there before we start installing that lift kit. So what we're gonna do right now is get all that done, taken care of, and then we can start talking about the lift kit and what we're planning on doing. I'm gonna get all that knocked out and taken care of right now. That way we can start focusing on this lift kit, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how to do that. I've never done it to this big of a scale before, but I'm excited to learn and show you guys along the way. Stay tuned. All right, I got a good bit done. Let's quickly go over what I did. Let's do that. First, we'll start with the gas tank. You may notice it's not in the Jeep. I'm actually gonna wait to install it in case there's anything else I have to do underneath there, like welding or cutting. I don't want the gas tank back installed before everything is complete underneath there. But anyways, I got it cleaned up. It looks a lot better. Pressure washed all that old mud and gunk off of it. And as for the holder, it was in kind of rough shape. Ideally, I would want to replace that. I just could not find one locally to buy, so I went ahead and fixed this one up. It looks better. Got it all painted and cleaned up, all the rust taken care of. And also replaced these straps. These straps were in rough shape. One of them was actually broken, so went ahead and replaced both of those, and now this thing is good to go. Ready to install back in a Jeep when we are done. New exhaust is all mounted up, mostly new exhaust. All the back area is pretty much done. Curious to know what it's gonna sound like. The muffler I bought for it has good reviews and showed a lot of people installing them on Jeep TJs, so hopefully it turns out well. Also cleaned up the transmission holder slash skid plate, whatever you wanna call it. Cleaned that up, painted it, and also I cut out this little section right here. The lift kit I'm installing on the Jeep requires you to do that because it will get in the way of the trailing arms. So I have to notch it out a little bit. Depending on each year, my year, I had to cut out like almost 3 inches, and in other years, you can cut out a little bit less or a little bit more. All that comes in the instructions or on the videos on YouTube and all the other information that Rough Country supplies. All good to go. This is ready to be installed back on the Jeep. But before we can install that, there was a few other things we had to do underneath here. I noticed back when I started driving this Jeep that I had a little bit of a transmission leak, and it looked like it was coming from the gasket underneath here, so I went ahead and replaced that, and also the transmission filter in there too. I got all that fixed out and replaced and put new fluid in there. It doesn't look like it's leaking anymore, but after we drive it for a little bit, we'll be able to know for sure. And also, this is the start of the lift kit. This right here is the new trailing arm locations for the long arm lift kit. Now this lift kit from Rough Country doesn't require any kind of welding, but in my case, since I had to fix my frame and add in these new sections to it because it was all rusty, so this kit could not fit over it. It had these tabs up here that were welded on. I had to cut these off and just weld it completely. I looked it up, saw some information of other people who had to do the same thing I'm doing, and they've been running it for years and haven't had any issue with just welding it on. So that is the route I went. The normal way to install this whole thing would be to drill holes where these tabs are, and then it goes through your frame and then you bolt it on. That was the normal way, but in this case, this is the only way I could do it. Now that we have that all knocked out, we can start working on the lift kit. First thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with the back. Since it's already kind of taken apart, I wanna go ahead and knock that out. It seems pretty simple how you install this lift kit. It's basically just taking everything off and installing it with all the new pieces. One thing I will have to do is cut off these old trailing arm mounts because they will get in the way of the new ones. So we have to cut those off. I'm gonna clean that up a little bit and then put another coat of paint on it. Same thing with the front area. Once we get to that section, we have to cut all that off too. There is a lot of information on YouTube or on Rough Country's website on how to install this lift kit. So I'm gonna be looking at both of those, making sure I'm doing everything the correct way, and start installing. Start with the back area and then move to the front. First thing we need to do is install that plate back. Let's do it. Surprisingly, not too hard. The hardest part about this whole thing was putting the gas tank back in. That is very difficult to do with gas in there, and it's kind of heavy, and trying to do it by yourself. So that was the hardest part about this, and it wasn't even anything to do with the lift kit. Overall, not bad at all. You may notice that I had to replace this upper shock mount. The old one was rusted out. I could have maybe got away with fixing it, but the amount of work I would have put into it to fix it, I just rather cut it out and replace it. It wasn't too bad. The other side was okay. It was a little bit of surface rust. Got all that cleaned up and then put a new coat of paint on both of these. Got all that out, welded it in place. Looks good. Pretty much all new suspension parts. The only thing I had to reuse was a couple little bolts. Other than that, the kit comes with pretty much everything you need to replace everything. There's a couple things that I was supposed to replace, but I didn't have to because it was already on here. Let me show you those. Right here where I'm pointing is an extension to the track rod. Normally you have to install that. You have to drill in a new hole and install that whole new bracket. But since there was already a rough country lift kit on this thing, I didn't have to replace that. And also the brake line needs extended. And since there was already a lift kit on this, that brake line has already been extended and it's in really good shape. It's a braided fuel line, all good there. I didn't want to go through replacing it because it's already in good shape, and that avoids me having to bleed all these brakes again. So that's the only few things that I didn't have to do that normally you would have to do for this. One more thing, you may notice these shocks, I have them still covered, that way I don't get any spray paint or anything on them. These are really nice shocks. These are the M1 monotube shocks. These do not come with the 4-inch long arm lift kit. Supposed to be a way smoother ride and have more of an OEM feel to driving this thing. So we'll be able to tell after we drive this how close it matches. One thing I do wish I could change is how everything is labeled. It's kind of hard to know what is what. So you have to know your way around a car a little bit and what things are called and size of bolts and stuff, because a lot of it is not labeled. Other than that, pretty easy. That still wasn't that hard to figure out. Once you watch the video, you can kind of tell what's going on. Overall, still a very easy thing to install. So the rear end was pretty easy, but now it's time to flip this thing around and start in the front. Front end might be a little bit more difficult considering there is steering involved. I don't know what that entails about steering wheel alignment and all that kind of stuff, so we'll find out afterwards. Let's start this thing up, move it out of the garage, clean up a little bit, and then we can start working on the front end. We're so close. little bit taller, a little bit taller. Overall, not too terrible. The front end wasn't that much harder than the rear end. I think the most difficult part was the steering arm. Getting the old one removed was pretty difficult. I actually couldn't get it off. I had to cut it. I had to put a cut in it and release the pressure, and that way it would slide off. But I'm not reusing this, so that's really no big deal. Just be careful when you're cutting it if you do cut it off. I'm pretty sure this was the only really difficult part of it. Sure, there was some time-consuming stuff in getting the axle aligned and getting the bolts to slide all the way through. A little difficult, but really not too bad. I was expecting way worse. The paint makes it look so much better underneath here. That was Eastwood's rust encapsulator. I've been using it on pretty much this whole build. It looks really good and covers really well. And since I was doing this lift kit anyway, I might as well make these axles look a lot better. And I think they do. A couple things I needed to replace that didn't come with the kit. Up here, this bushing for the spring, that needed replaced. Along with the bump stops, those also needed replaced because they weren't even there. And then the steering stabilizer also. I went ahead and ordered one of those because the old one was looking a little rough. Other than that, there really wasn't anything else I needed or had to replace. I do have a lot of extra bolts, and I think that's because I used some of the original bolts when I was supposed to use the new hardware. I don't think it was a big concern. The bolts I reused were in good shape. And a lot of those bolts are from pieces that I didn't have to replace. Just like the rear end, there's a couple things I didn't have to replace because they were already swapped out, such as the brake lines, because the brake lines needed to be a little bit longer. And since this Jeep already had a lift kit on it, there's no need to replace them because they were already replaced. So overall, I would rate this thing as like a 6 out of 10 difficulty. Not super hard. Not super complicated. I think if I had some help, I could have knocked this out in one day. That's also considering I had the parts I needed and I didn't have to deal with rust. I think we could have knocked it out in one day. But since I had to wait for a couple parts to be ordered and I also went ahead and painted the axles and stuff, that added on a couple extra days of work or just waiting for parts to come in. Overall, I'm very happy with it. I'll be able to tell more once I drive it a little bit. Obviously, we can't test that out right now since the interior is all taken apart. I backed it out and drove it around a little bit, make sure it didn't fall apart, and it didn't. Once this thing is back together, painted and complete, we'll be able to do an actual off-roading test and get a better idea on how well this thing handles. I think it should be okay, though. So I want to give one more huge thank you to Rough Country. They have been a big supporter of my YouTube channel, and especially this build right now. They offer a lot of aftermarket accessories for your Jeep or truck or a lot of vehicles they offer. New bumpers, lift kits, lights, accessories. I've been very happy with everything I put on my vehicle, so if you guys are looking for some aftermarket accessories for your vehicles, check them out. Their link is in my description. You guys can check them out and see what they offer for your vehicle. Now that we got the lift kit knocked out and out of the way, we can start finishing up the appearance and body work and maybe even start doing the paint. I got most of the body work done in the back end. I did notice a lot more rust and stuff in the front end on the fenders and hood especially. So next episode, we're going to be tackling that, finishing up the little bit of rust on the body that we need to handle, mainly in the front area. Get it all primed, and also I have a new drive shaft and slip yoke eliminator kit. We'll be installing all that in the next episode and talk about why you kind of need that for the lift kit. But all that is going to be for the next episode. Hopefully get this thing ready and maybe start painting. Let me know in the comments what color you guys are picturing for this thing. I have an idea of what I want, but I'm still open to ideas. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you don't know, I have an Instagram that I post behind the scenes on my story about what I'm doing that week and for the upcoming episodes, so you can check that out if you want to. If not, I will see you in the next episode. Back on this thing, getting it ready for paint, maybe start painting it. Who knows what next episode has in store, because I don't know yet. Thank you so much for watching.